Hello everybody and welcome to a short video looking at what is probably the most niche game on the PlayStation 4. The game is called Drive on Moscow. It is a game by Slytherin, which is a specialist in super hardcore strategy games, and as the name of the game suggests, this particular title is looking at the invasion of what is now Russia from the German forces in World War II, with Hitler obviously intending to quickly march through Russia, take Moscow before winter, and basically wrap up the entirety of World War II from there. If he had been successful with this particular campaign, the entire war would have taken a very different turn and been quite possibly impossible for the Allies to win it. So thankfully for the rest of the world, Russia was able to hold Hitler at literally the gates of Moscow, and from that point start to turn him back. And once the Soviets under Stalin were able to really come together to defend their country, they stayed together as a very strong unit and were able to really quickly push the Nazis back to Germany all through Eastern Europe. So this game is depicting a very critical moment in human history, and it does so with, it attempts to be incredibly realistic and authentic and basically tell the story of the military campaign by being very precise in the historical research that went into the game and the way that the mechanics work for it. I will have a full review of this game up on digitallydownloaded.net as you watch this video, but basically the point is that the structure of this game could only possibly apply to a game that is about this invasion of Russia. So you couldn't take the design of this particular title and apply it wholesale to any other conflict, and as a result of that, it's a very focused game. It tells the particular nuances of these battles. There are 4 scenarios in the game, all representing various parts of the campaign, and those four scenarios are all they're depicted in a way here that would be impossible in a more general game. So it is definitely one for people who really care about their history and who are really interested in their military history and what happened through World War II, because what we see in this game we don't see in any other game. One of the things that's so interesting about this campaign is it was always a story of one side kind of rolling over the other. Initially, when the Germans entered into Russia, the Soviet forces were very disorganized and quite poorly managed, and they were pushed back very quickly. And like I said at the start of the video, Nazi Germany got all the way to the gates of Moscow before Stalin was able to rally his troops and start to push back against it. It was a very bloody campaign. It resulted in an awful lot of deaths, but the Russians were ultimately successful. And once they had managed to put a stop to the advance, once it became quite clear that the Nazi Germany was not going to get into Moscow, they were able to start pushing back very quickly, and it became very overwhelming for the Nazis that were left in Russia. Amongst other things, winter was coming, to take a quote from Game of Thrones, and that is a very bad time to be an army in Russia, as Napoleon discovered with his own invasion a century or so beforehand. History repeats, and basically the same mistakes were made by Hitler. So because it was a story of overwhelming odds on one side or the other, this game plays a lot differently to a lot of other strategy games. In most strategy games, you pick them up and you basically expect them to be balanced in such a way that they're kind of fair. You're always meant to have the feeling that it doesn't matter which side you pick, you've got a chance, and that the quality of the forces are even enough that as long as you're strategic enough about what you're doing, you can be ultimately successful. This game doesn't really try to do that. In this game, if you happen to pick the Russians at the start of the campaign, the first push into Russia, you are probably going to struggle because it is very hard. The Germans have overwhelming odds, and any decent AI, and even the lowest level AI, or another human person that you're playing against, will be able to easily capitalize on that. And then in the second half of the campaign, or the second 2 scenarios where the Russians are starting to push back, it kind of becomes the reverse. It becomes very hard to win as the German side. Now you might wonder, why would you even want to play that when the results are kind of foregone? The it is possible to kind of reverse history and create a what-if scenario where the other side wins. It's very difficult to do, but that's the kind of thing that armchair experts that would be attracted to this kind of game, armchair generals that are attracted to this kind of game would be really into. They'd love the challenge of seeing if they can outthink the strategy of the historical counterparts, if they were able to find a way to victory when the real life history people generals in history were not able to. And that's always a great challenge, and for developers that want to provide people with that kind of experience, the chance to test actual military strategy and the chance to see if they can find solutions for puzzles that didn't seem to really have a solution, the challenge for a developer is to enable that. And to enable that, you need to have the authentic forces. You need to do oodles of research on exactly the placement of the various armies and the various movements at that point, at the beginning of the battle. Obviously, once the battle starts, you need the AI to be adaptive enough to be able to change up strategies or respond to what the player is doing. But the starting point of these battles should be meticulously researched. And that's a great thing about Drive on Moscow. It is meticulous in its research. I admit that I'm not the world's biggest expert on what happened through this particular conflict, but I know enough of it to know that what is presented here is very authentic. And of course, it doesn't look like much on the screen. You've probably turned off the screen while you're listening to me talk if you're still tuning in. It doesn't look like much, but the thing that this game does so well is really represent that kind of board game appeal, which is what the really hardcore strategy people love. They love the old board games that had little cardboard tiles that you'd pop out and you'd set up battles, and then over a course of a weekend or a week or a month or however long you'd take, you would have the map set up on your table in your dining room at home, and whoever you were playing at the time, you'd catch up with them. You take a turn or two and you just leave it there to come back to later. This was all the strategy game experience before video games were a real thing. We're talking about War and Peace era and all that kind of stuff. And it still kind of survives today thanks to board game manufacturers like GMT Games and the like. But it's a certain aesthetic and a certain experience, and it's not something for everybody. And like I said at the very start of the video, this is as niche as PlayStation 4 games get. But for people who really like that stuff and haven't, remember playing those board games, this kind of thing is really nice to have on the PlayStation 4 because it's not something that we've had before on console, and hopefully it's enough of a success that we do see more of these really serious strategy games start to come out on the console. Alright, thanks very much for watching, and we will see you at the next video.